All right, so welcome everybody to Supervision Basics. I think we're almost all in the room now. So I will introduce myself again. My name is Chantal Tovet. I work at Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, and I work on supervision, mostly developing resources and videos related to supervision. You can find all of the resources that we've developed on mcgill.ca/grad supervision. This is a website that's dedicated entirely to supporting students and supervisors who are in supervised thesis research. It's got lots of new content this year. So we have newly developed pages. We have links to all the services that you have access to as a student. And it also has a new series of videos, some of which I'll be pointing you towards later in the session. I really encourage you to check it out. I'm going to cover just the basics today, as the title suggests, but supervision is a lifelong set of skills involving communication and interpersonal relationships and negotiation. So although I'll just cover the basics today, there's much more to learn in your time here. Okay, so with that, we will get started. My slides are not advancing, everyone. It's 2022. There we go. Okay, so I'd like to start by acknowledging the land on which I'm working today. So McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. I'd like to take a second to acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather, yourselves included, virtually. The picture on the right is a picture of the Arts Building in the cupola, and the flag that's flying at the top is a flag that represents the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. You can learn more about the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe on mcgill.ca/indigenous. I strongly recommend that you check it out, especially if you're new to the area. There's lots to learn about the peoples and the lands that we work on. So please do check it out. And we'll start with our objectives. Okay, so at this session, I have two main goals that I hope you can leave today feeling confident that we've at least started. The first one is to identify strategies for clarifying expectations with your supervisor. That's the core of supervision, really. It's the one thing that you'll be doing and redoing and doing again and again throughout your time here is trying to get a sense by communicating with your supervisor of what's expected and how you can meet those expectations. Next thing that I'm going to focus on is giving everyone here the opportunity to learn more about the resources available on the topic of supervision. The one that I mostly work on is the Graduate Supervision website, but there are other resources too, like My Path and skill sets that I'm going to mention briefly that are very valuable in terms of helping you get the best possible experience during your time here. Okay, so I'm going to cover a lot of material today in my hour. I'm going to leave time at the end for questions, and during the question period, I'm going to turn the recording off. But here are the four things that I hope that you can take away from this session. I've broken them down so that hopefully they'll stick in the overflow of information that you receive as a new student. Number one, first strategy for success is know your roles and responsibilities, and I'm going to cover them a little bit. We're going to work on this one more collaboratively. 2, clarify and re-clarify expectations. 3, set goals and track your progress. And 4, know where to go for help. This one I'm going to talk about in a bit more depth because there's all kinds of help you might be seeking. But if you're in any doubt at all about where to go for help, I just wanted to throw it out there. GPD is your best first resource. GPD stands for Graduate Program Director. And when you get a copy of these slides, you'll see this link here. We'll link you to a page that will list all the departments so you can easily find out who your GPD is. So if you do need help, if you do have questions, if you're not sure who to ask, try your GPD first. If they don't know the answer, they can direct you to the person who might know the answer. Okay, so my first sort of section here is so you have a supervisor. And I say this a bit tongue-in-cheek because I realize it's possible that some of you might not have a supervisor. So if we could use the reaction button to get a sense of who's in the room today, could you give me a thumbs up if you do in fact have a supervisor already? You know who they are. Awesome, I'm seeing a bunch. Excellent. Okay, that's most people, but yes, there are some people who might not have a supervisor yet or might not be able to reach the reaction button, and that's normal. So for many, many students coming to McGill, you have to have a supervisor in place before you even successfully apply. But for some students, you really don't connect with your supervisor until you've been in your program for a while. And that can depend on whether it's a master's, a non-thesis master's, a project-based master's, or even there are some PhD programs where you complete coursework and you're in year 2 before you formally get a supervisor. So there is a real range, which is going to come out as we start discussing supervision in a bit more depth. Okay, so the first question I have is really to pull on everyone's prior knowledge and their prior experiences with supervision. So I'm going to ask you to share in the chat, and we're a small enough group that if one or two people would like to raise their hands and add something by unmuting, that should be okay too. So my first question for the group, so pulling on your previous experiences of supervision, what is a supervisor's role in supporting a master's or a PhD student? And the follow-up question is, how is a supervisor's role different from a course instructor's role? So share in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and unmute, you're welcome to. How would you answer this? How would you explain this to someone who might just be starting their program, if you know the answer? Yeah. Excellent. Okay, I'm seeing one comment saying they make sure you meet your milestones on time. Yeah. Hello, I can hear you. I think that person, hello, might have unmuted, not on purpose. Thank you. Yeah, supervised research. Absolutely. So course instructors really set up like a path of learning for you and they give you assignments. Supervisors don't, right? That's one of the key differences. Yeah, I like that too. So someone else comments in the chat, the supervisor's role is to direct and streamline research works to be carried out. So they're directing and they're streamlining, but they're not actually necessarily doing the research, right? They're helping you do the research. They're helping you make the plans. Oh, I like this comment too. So supervisor is there to guide you and make sure you accomplish what you're there for. Again, like the emphasis is on support, right? Not necessarily on giving you set tasks, but on making sure that you have what you need to accomplish the tasks that you're here to do. Oh, I really like this comment too. So I think the supervisor role is about sharing experiences, challenging you, helping you and guiding your way to achieve your own results. That's a really great answer. I like that focus on challenging you, right? So a really good supervisor is going to want you to be able to do not just an okay job, but a great job that you're happy with towards the end that helps get you where you want to be. Thank you all so much for sharing. I think you all hit on the key themes here, which is that the supervisor's role is different than the course instructor's role in the sense that they're not really there to structure your learning in the same way that a course instructor would. So a course instructor is going to tell you, read this, and hand this in by this date. A supervisor is going to be a bit more hands-off and is going to let you steer things a little bit more directly than you might otherwise do. Oh, another comment. Yeah, a major difference between course instructor and supervisor is course instructor be particularly focusing on a particular course, while the supervisor is helping you zone in on your overall program objective. Yeah, and it's a lot more open-ended, right? So the relationship you have with the supervisor is going to go in many different directions that you both kind of co-steer, and it's not necessarily going to be focused on one set objective that the instructor decides alone. Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for sharing. That's brilliant. Okay. So we asked this question of supervisors too, and I'm going to show you what they said. Here are the words that came up when we asked them to define supervision. You'll see that a lot of it really dovetails with what your colleagues were sharing too. So a lot of them see it as mentoring. So mentoring really means helping guide someone towards accomplishing the goals that they want to accomplish, not just within a set of work tasks, but wider in terms of developing a talented researcher or someone who's going to go on to do independent research or independent projects later on. They also focused on guiding, learning, and teaching. So there's a lot of overlap with course instruction, but as we can see, the difference has really come down to the more collaborative nature of the research relationship and the different dynamics in play versus who is really setting the path forward. Okay, so this brings me to my first strategy for success that I mentioned at the start, and that's know your roles and responsibilities. So we've already started to define this a little bit, and I'm going to present some quick things to keep in mind. Okay, so I will admit it was difficult to come up with things that would be true across faculties. And even within this list, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different responsibilities that might differ depending on what faculty you're in. But broadly speaking, if you showed up today not really understanding what a supervisory relationship is, here are some general points you can use to orient yourself towards your role and your supervisor's role. And the key thing to take away here is that what really matters is understanding kind of the boundaries of what your supervisor does and the boundaries of what you do to make sure that you're each adding what it is that you need to add to make the relationship and the partnership work. Okay, so for supervisees, we'll start. So for supervisees, the first role, I would say, or responsibility is to propose thesis topics. A lot of you will have kind of already done this, perhaps at the admission stage. It depends on your program. In some programs, proposing the topic is going to be almost 100% in your field or in your court to do. And in other research areas, you're really going to be more limited based on what your supervisor's research already is. So in the arts in particular, the topic usually is a bit more separate from your supervisor. And in STEM, usually your topic is directly related to your supervisor. So that's an important question when it comes to fit and figuring things out. Your supervisor's responsibility correspondingly is to help you select and refine your thesis topic. So they're there to help make sure that the thesis topic that you propose is something that you can do in the span of your program and that you have the resources to do within the resources that are available to you and to your supervisor. Next point is submit your work on time. And this sounds easy, but of course is not, because if you're in a PhD program in particular, the actual markers of the milestones are pretty far apart. Like sometimes you can have just a comps milestone and then a final thesis milestone without much in between. So the work of a PhD student in particular is to come up with internal deadlines and tiny sub goals to make sure that you have what you need to graduate on time and to finish that big milestone. Your supervisor's role on the other side of that is to provide timely feedback. And that's why you need to set up internal deadlines for things, because your supervisor needs time to actually review the pieces of your thesis or your big project before you can actually be ready to hand it in at the end. You'll notice, though, that it's not necessarily your supervisor's responsibility to make sure that you finish on time. Many supervisors will be really happy to help you hold yourself accountable. So if you want to tell them, I'm handing this in by the 6th, please expect it by the 6th, they'll be happy to treat that as a deadline and to follow up with you if it's not there on the 6th. But in most cases, supervisors are they see it as their role to give you the feedback, but they don't necessarily see it as their role to be guiding the timeline to make sure that you're on time. They mostly see that as your responsibility as the manager of your research project and manager of your research timeline. So don't be afraid to take charge there and to think about what you want your timeline to look like and to discuss with your supervisor how much time they're going to need to give you feedback in order to meet the deadlines that you're setting. Okay, next. The next one concerns meetings. So generally it's a supervisee's responsibility to prepare for the meetings. That can look like preparing an agenda or taking notes or sending the notes after a meeting. And it's your supervisor's responsibility to meet regularly. So it's their job to be available. But generally speaking, most supervisors will see that meeting time as your time. And so you want to make sure that you're using that time in a way that's going to be helpful for you. And that means sometimes doing a little bit of prep ahead of a meeting to decide what it is that you really need to spend that time on. The next one is the same. So it's a shared responsibility, and that's to stay in communication between meetings. What that looks like really depends on you and your supervisor and how the two of you work together. But it's important that you both are committed to doing it in a way that respects both of your availabilities and boundaries and time off and things like that. Okay, so that's been what I can tell you abstractly about the supervisee and supervisor responsibilities. You'll notice there's a link under supervisor responsibilities. That leads to a page that gives you a whole overview of additional supervisor responsibilities. A lot of them don't have a corresponding point with supervisee responsibilities, but I encourage you to check it out because it gives you a much more in-depth sense of all the things a supervisor does and the resources that they can rely on to do that kind of stuff, which can also be useful for you. Okay, so with that, we're going to launch into our first case study. Okay, so case study number 1. I'm going to ask everybody to talk about this in chat. So we're not going to do breakout rooms, but I will give everyone a minute or so to think after I read this case study out about how they would answer. Okay, so case study 1, it's the middle of the summer and you're having a hard time reaching your supervisor. You need your supervisor's signature on a form to pursue an opportunity. You've emailed them about it and it's been 3 weeks now with no answer. What's the best way to remind your supervisor about your request? And for this one, actually, I forgot I have a poll. The other ones I don't have a poll, but for this one I do have a poll, so I will launch my poll. Hey, someone already has a great answer. Thank you. one sec. I'm just going to launch the poll for case study 1. There we go. Okay, so here are some answers I've sketched out, and I've sketched them out this way so that we can talk about some of the non-ideal answers that might be tempting, but that I would recommend you avoid. Okay, so what's the best way to remind your supervisor about your request? It's multiple choice. You can choose multiple options that you think are good. And the first one is assume their silence means they're refusing to sign. Never bring it up again. B, send a short email reminder with the form attached. C, give them the right until the day it's due. And then if they haven't signed, show up their office with the form and a pen. Or D, put it on the agenda to discuss at your next weekly meeting. Or E, try something else, in which case I might ask you to share in the chat if you're comfortable. Using GPT is a good example of try something else. Okay, I can see the answers filtering in. I can see consensus forming too, which is great. I will admit, spoiler, no one's choosing the first option, which is good. I put the first option in because I am often tempted to take the first option. This reveals something possibly about me. The first option obviously is not ideal. Assuming is never a good idea. Okay, let's close the poll and let's see what we all decided consensus-wise. All right, so there was a strong consensus that B was the right answer, followed by D. So the answer most people selected they would do is send a short email reminder with the form attached, or put it on the agenda to discuss at your next weekly meeting. All right, so I kind of gave away A is not a good answer because A is pretty avoidant, right? And often if you don't get an answer to an email, it's not necessarily a no. It usually just means you have to change up the way that you're approaching the issue. Okay, so I like the answer that someone is putting in chat. So for their try something else, they said, try a different like online communication tool. So try research group messaging apps like Slack or Teams. Yeah, especially for something that's quick, right? So if it's something that doesn't require a long discussion, Teams can be great. Even if it's just asking if they've had a chance to look at it, that might just go prompt them to look at the email. Fantastic. Okay, so for people who chose send a short email reminder with the form attached, what made this seem like the best answer to you? Share your thought process with us, if you wouldn't mind. Oh yeah, someone brings up a good question. So is it okay other than email? Is it formal? Yeah, this is a really good thing to talk about with your supervisor. So some supervisors are very comfortable with Teams or Slack. They use it all the time. Other supervisors might not really use it, might not have it turned on. So it really depends on your particular supervisor. And that's something you can ask. You can ask your supervisor in early meetings, are you comfortable with Teams? And that's only if you are comfortable with Teams. I'm assuming the person who suggested this is comfortable with Slack or Teams, maybe has used it in the past. If you're not comfortable with Slack or Teams, you also don't have to do it that way. But yeah, it can really vary by person to person. Most supervisors at McGill, I would say, are not too worried about things being too informal. Most supervisors I've met really are more kind of engaged by things that are efficient and fast. That's most supervisors I've talked to, not all of them, would, if they had a choice between something that was formal versus something that was efficient and fast, they'd go for efficient and fast. And that's because supervisors get a ton of email, like just a staggering amount of email. And so for them, being able to go through requests very, very fast is often a thing they're very grateful for. Great, I'm glad that helped. Does anybody else want to share why sending a short email reminder with the form attached seemed like the best option? Or why it seemed better than some of the other options that you didn't choose? Yes. So someone in the chat comments, we've all missed or forgotten emails before. Yes, we have. Me, I've done that. So having the form attached makes it convenient. Yeah, that's what I really love about this answer too. You kind of, it builds in this forgiveness, right? It doesn't accuse the supervisor of like not responding to the email. It just makes it easy for the supervisor to comply with the request or consider the request again if the email got buried long, long ago. Yeah, excellent. I'm seeing other people echo that too, that like when you're in this situation and someone hasn't responded to your email and they're a professor, usually it's just that they've gotten overwhelmed with email and they just have not gotten around to it, or they meant to reply, but then someone dropped by their office, maybe with a form and a pen, and they got distracted. And so usually it can mean that they just need a quick reminder. Yeah. I'll also say showing up in person, not a bad idea. Waiting until the day it's due is risky, right? So you might want to be a little bit more proactive. And that's why I think sending the short email reminder with the form attached is a good option. I think putting it on the next weekly meeting agenda is also a great option. I co-sign that. Does anybody who chose that one want to say why that seemed like a good option? I can imagine lots of people probably picked both. So if you picked both, or you thought putting it on the agenda to discuss the next weekly meeting was an option, why? What was your thought process? Yeah, yes, thank you. So someone chats that it's a great occasion to directly ask them about it. And yes, so if email isn't working for you, so say you send the email reminder with the form attached and it doesn't work, changing the way that you ask is often really important. Sometimes when you don't receive an answer, especially from a professor, it's maybe because writing the response is going to be daunting, especially if they have questions. Right. So sometimes it's good to switch things up and to ask them if this is something they'd rather discuss in a meeting, or to bring it up at the next time you see them as a reminder. And that's because it can get you out of the loop of email, which can be very useful if your supervisor just has a couple of questions that are too long to write out, but are easy to say. In terms of whether weekly meetings have to happen, they're recommended. I think they're more common in STEM. So in STEM, you'll be collaborating really closely with the supervisor generally, like you'll be doing shared research, and so you'll have lots to talk about. But in other fields are not so as common as that. So it really varies. It's something you'll talk about with your supervisor during your first couple of meetings. But usually they're check-in meetings. So they're not formal meetings where you're like presenting things. Usually they're just quick check-ins to make sure that you have what you need. And so you have your supervisor's time and attention for a set period at the time. The other good thing about weekly meetings is that they can reduce emails because you can just save your questions for the weekly meeting and discuss them then. So it varies, but they tend to be a good thing generally, depending on your field. Okay, thank you everybody for participating in my poll. We have 2 other case studies in the workshop that we'll come to later, but we're going to move on to my next text section. Hello? Okay. Did you want to ask a question? Hello? Okay, we'll go on to clarifying expectations. Okay, so clarifying expectations is our next takeaway from the session today. This, I think, is the most important one. This is the one that you want to really focus on, especially when you start your relationship with your supervisor. And it can really just help prevent problems down the line. Okay, so when we think about expectations, in case you're wondering what I'm talking about or what I might mean, I like to think about it in terms of explicit expectations, which are things that are on the surface. So they're things like policies, rules in the handbook, program requirements. All that stuff is easy because you can navigate it. It's right on the surface. So when you're trying to find out, okay, what's expected of me? What do I need to do? The explicit expectations are right there. You can go consult them at any time you want, which is nice. The problem, though, is that, as you can see in the diagram, it's just the surface. Usually the explicit expectations are things that are so general that they can be said for a wide swath of people. So people who are like in your program, people who are at McGill, and that can make them kind of vague. And so there's really, like icebergs, there's a lot more that's below the surface, and that tends to be the more important stuff, the stuff that you really need to clarify through discussion. So what's below the surface is implicit expectations, and those are things that are unspoken rules or assumptions or things that you really need to clarify directly that benefit from explicit discussion with your supervisor. So they're things that you're only going to know by talking to your supervisor and clarifying how the two of you are going to work together. Some examples of implicit expectations are things like we talked about in the previous case study. So Does your supervisor like to use Teams? Implicit expectation, right? Your supervisor might be like, yeah, everyone loves to use Teams. We all love to use Teams. Whereas you might be like, I do not like to use Teams. I've never used Teams before. So it's important to clarify for the both of you what that expectation is about the ways that you'll stay in connection between meetings and things like that. Yes, so yes, a note, if you guys could please stay muted until we get to the case studies. Thank you, Chris, for posting that. So far, we've been pretty good, but if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand. I totally won't mind. Okay. Okay, so how do you actually go about clarifying the below the surface unspoken assumptions? The tool that you have at your disposal that everybody uses is the letter of understanding. The link here, when you get the slides, will take you to an entire page in the Graduate Supervision website that talks through what an LOU is and how to use it. The one thing I'll note is that LOUs are required for PhD students. So if you're in a PhD program, you will definitely be hearing about this. If you're in a master's program, though, they're still strongly recommended, and there's nothing to stop you from actually using one, because all it is at the core is a conversation where you and your supervisor sit down and you go through a series of questions and try to understand and get to the root of how the two of you are going to work together. So what works for the both of you? What are your shared expectations? And where do you need to come to a mutual expectation that is going to be beneficial for the both of you in terms of accomplishing your program goals? So the letter of understanding really ensures at its core that you and your supervisor discuss the expectations at the start so you don't get any unpleasant surprises later on. It helps you write down the specifics. So the way that most LOUs work is it's a template that you get from your department. Then you and your supervisor sit down, you review what's in the template, and it has a bunch of questions. You answer the questions. Usually you're prompted to write those things down, and that way you have a written record of what you and your supervisor agreed to that you can return to later on, because a lot of what gets said in the first meetings with your supervisor, it's a lot of information. It doesn't always stick. And so the written down LOU can be very helpful to you in the long term in terms of going back and then potentially renegotiating some of that stuff if it's no longer working for you. Okay, at the end, especially if you have a template, you're also going to review and discuss the key responsibilities, and you're going to sign. Most departments have a template. You can usually find it on their website. I'd say in about 60% of the cases. If you can't find it on their website, you can always ask your supervisor for one. Most supervisors who have PhD students will have a template, or you can find other resources online at this page too. Okay, so the last thing I want to leave you guys with regards to LOU is a sense of what gets asked in LOUs. And the reason I want to share this with you is that it can be really intimidating when you're sitting down with your supervisor and they're going to start going through these questions. It can be very helpful if you have a chance to think through what your expectations are and what your questions might be. So that when you get into the LOU conversation, you feel like you can also talk about what kinds of things might be helpful for you and communicate some of that to your supervisor early on. The way LOUs work, they're supposed to be two-way conversations, but there's obviously an asymmetry of power because your supervisor has been at McGill for years and years and years, and they do things a certain way. And then you, especially if you haven't studied at McGill before, are a new person in the environment. You're still trying to learn the ways that you are going to work in this environment. So trying to prepare for the LOU conversations by thinking through some of these questions can be very helpful in terms of being able to advocate for yourself in these early meetings. So the questions to think about. These are the common ones. Each LOU has a slightly different set of questions, but these are some of the common themes. So one, how often will you meet, right? We had a question about this earlier on in our session today. It's one of the things that you'll discuss in the LOU. Next, how will you communicate between meetings? This is a good time to talk about Slack or Teams or other methods of communication. How quickly can you expect feedback on written work? This is essential because you need to know when you have to hand the first drafts in order to get the feedback, in order to revise, in order to get towards the ending. And it's something you want to know from your supervisor as soon as possible. Next, what responsibilities do you have as a researcher? This is especially true if you're in a lab. So if you're in a lab, things can get kind of fuzzy in terms of, is this thesis work or is this not thesis work? So it's good to talk about what the expectations about that are and to get really clear on how this connects to your thesis. Next, what support will you or your supervisor provide when it comes to publishing, attending conferences, or professional development? Definitely ask about this, especially if you're interested. It's always helpful to signal that you're interested in this kind of thing and to give a hint as to what you might be interested in. There's no guarantee that your supervisor will be able to give you exactly what you're looking for, but often just signaling that you're interested can help them at least keep an eye out for things that might be up your alley. And then next, how your contribution is going to be credited. So if you're in a field where collaborative authorship is the norm, where you have co-authors and first authors, definitely talk with your supervisor about how that works in your specific lab context with reference to the projects that you're going to be working on. You want to understand this from the beginning. You don't want to find out at the end of the process, especially if things don't go the way that you expected they would. Okay. So as I said at the top, really the goal here is to make sure that you are not afraid to ask questions and you're not afraid to find a balance that works for you so that the supervisory relationship is mutually beneficial for both you and your supervisor. Okay, I'm going to leave space for any questions. I've gone through a lot of content. Does anybody have any other questions they'd like to bring up? If so, let me know in the chat. I'll just give a little bit of a pause. Oh, I see one. Yeah, okay, so question in the chat. Regarding complementary courses that we can take from other faculties, do we have to consult with course instructors? This, I think, depends. I think there's no harm in talking to your course instructor about it, especially since in some cases you might need special permission to register. But I would maybe just signal to the course instructor that you need permission if you do. The person who's going to know whether you actually need official permission from the instructor to register is going to be your graduate program coordinator, which I will write in the chat so everybody remembers. They will likely have the information about whether you can register for that course, whether it's going to count for your program. So graduate program coordinator, GPC. And if you don't have a GPC at the moment, because I know some of the positions are vacant, I would talk to your graduate program director or GPD. You can talk to your supervisor too, but your supervisor may not know the ins and outs of registration. It kind of depends on how long they themselves have been at McGill and whether they've encountered that, that issue themselves. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, you can find the list of GPCs and GPDs there. I will admit that's the common term, but different faculties have different terms, but they're all on this spreadsheet. But yeah, no harm talking to the course instructor generally. I think sometimes just hearing that somebody's interested in your course can really like make someone happy. So I think that you would not be badly received. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next case study. This one is not a poll, so I'm going to ask people to, oh, sorry, there's another question. Let me just go back to this question. Okay, is it recommended to have a prior conversation with supervisor through email before arriving at campus in the case of PhD? Yeah, I would say sure. It doesn't have to be a serious email. It can just be, hello, professor, I'm looking forward to working with you at such and such a date. Is there anything I can do in the meantime to get started in working towards my research? So maybe just kind of asking your supervisor if there's preliminary things that you should be looking at could be a good way to start the conversation. I would say that there's no obligation to. There are lots of supervisors who will be like, we'll talk when you get here. Don't worry about it. Like you're not on the clock yet. So just worry about getting here and settling in Montreal. You don't need to email me. Other professors, might appreciate, they might feel like, yeah, look, this person's so keen. They're interested in the research. They might appreciate your email. So really it's up to you. If you feel like you want to get started, if you're eager and you want to start the conversation with them, you can, no requirement to. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you for that question. That was very helpful. Okay, so we're going to go to case study number 2. Okay, so I was too enthusiastic about my own case study. Come back, case study. There we go. Okay, so case study number 2, you've just started your program. Your supervisor asks you for your phone number at the end of your LOU meeting, noting that sometimes you will have time-sensitive deadlines that they may need to contact you if there are last-minute emergencies. You're not comfortable with your supervisor texting you, but you give them your phone number because you do not want to make a bad first impression. Plus, they said texting was only for emergencies. 1 month later, you receive a text on Tuesday at 8 p.m. asking you to answer a question about a grant proposal due the following week that you have been assisting with. It is after hours, but the question just takes a moment to answer, so you respond. The following day, you receive another text after your standard work hours. Your supervisor continues to text you throughout the week about the grant proposal. The texting has gradually made you more anxious, but you're not sure what to say. So what expectations do you need to clarify with your supervisor, and what would you do in this situation? So I'll give everybody a moment to think, and I'll ask you to share in the chat what you would do and which expectations you notice here you might want to clarify. Okay, does anybody have any suggestions on what expectations you would need to clarify? What are some of the issues that you guys see happening in this case study? Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat. So I think it's the best option is to define the use of institutional email with the compromise to review it frequently. Very nice. Yeah. You're well within your status as a student to say, I really prefer to use my institutional email. I don't like to use my private phone number for work-related matters. Yeah. This is something that is in most LOUs too, so you can go back and review and be like, I think we should really just stick to institutional email. It is a basic policy. Okay, in the chat too. So I'd clarify with them the expectations for communication outside of standard work hours. Yeah. Specifically, I'd ask if it's okay not to respond until the next day. I think that's great, right? So just clarifying what your working hours are and when you'll respond could really alleviate some of the anxiety. Text can be really anxious because you can feel really pressured to respond immediately in a way that we don't have the same expectation about email. And so really just being clear about when you'll respond can be a great solution. I have somebody else in the chat. Yeah, I mean, you're not alone. A person in the chat, he says, to be honest, as a student, I will be very happy to see my supervisor keeps in touch even after work hours. But as an employee, yes, going formal would be a better option indeed. Yeah, I know so many students who are mostly in case study 1, where they just get no response. So often that this case study might be really cheerful. They're like, yay, my supervisor's engaged. But yeah, there can be kind of 2 extremes of that, right? So I think as a student or as an employee, it is better to go with actual official channels. Excellent. See, you're getting support in the chat too. That's great. Yeah. Okay. Another one in the chat. So before anything, don't feel comfortable with text messages. I would answer the things they asked by email. Yeah. Would use email to clarify that I prefer to maintain things in email, but there's no big issue in the situation. Yeah, I agree, right? Like if you like texting, you can go for it. Some people really like it. Another option you can consider too is some phones have actual settings where you can make sure that some numbers only give you notifications during work hours, right? So you can actually kind of employ a technical solution to this too, and change the expectation that you're going to be immediately reachable on text, if that makes you more comfortable. But yeah, I think you guys really got the issues, right? So there's 2 issues really at stake here. There's how you communicate. So do you use email or do you use your texting? And then there's the work hours question. So do you respond to things outside of work hours or not? The great thing about graduate school, and also the terrible thing, is that often you get to set your own work hours. So if you're the kind of person who works really well in the evenings and 8 p.m. is like your natural work time, it sounds like you and your supervisor would be a great match. If you're the kind of person who likes to take evenings off and work in the mornings, this might not be the best setup for you, in which case you'd have to find something else that works for you. So there's no need to set specific work hours according to what you think they should be. Most people get to set the work hours that work for them in graduate school, but you want to make sure that you are making time to unwind, to relax, to spend time with people where you don't have to constantly be on. I think that's where I'll leave that. Thank you guys so much for your suggestions. These were great. Okay. Okay, my next strategy for success is setting goals and tracking progress. 2 key things you want to do as a graduate student. Okay, so what do these have to do with supervision? The reason I'm bringing them up is because thesis research, as we talked about at the very beginning of the presentation, is self-directed. So your supervisor is there to guide you, but they're not necessarily there to make sure that you finish things exactly by your milestones. Often that falls to you, and they're there to make sure that you have what you need to get where you need to go. And what that means is that you want to get very deliberate about identifying your goals, setting timelines that include sub-goals with internal timelines, like I talked about earlier on. And most importantly, you need to find ways to maintain your motivation over the long term. This is something that pretty much everyone struggles with when they're doing a massive multi-year project. It can get very exhausting if you're doing it 200% every single day. And so setting goals and making sure you can make meaningful progress towards those goals in a timeline that you're happy with will go really far in terms of helping make sure that you can maintain that motivation to continue working even when things get hard and you get bored of your topic, if that happens. We have some key tools to help you do this. So when it comes to identifying goals, the tool I'll recommend is MyPath. There's a link to this in the slides you can explore. MyPath has so many different things going on right now. They have video series. You can actually use MyPath through the video series. They have an app. They have workshops where you can meet fellow students and talk about your goals. There's lots and lots to explore, but at its core, what MyPath does is it helps students and postdocs pursue their goals using an individual development plan, or an IDP. An IDP is exactly kind of what it sounds like. It's a plan for your individual development. When they talk about individual development in the context of MyPath, usually they're talking about 3 different kinds of development. So academic, personal, so kind of work-life balance, your personal relationships, and professional. So it's not just academic, although you can use it for academic. It has kind of a more holistic view of what it means to pursue goals, to be alive, to be happy, to be doing meaningful work. All that stuff is covered in MyPath. You can watch actually one of the videos here, so you'll have the link when you actually get the slides. This is a link to how the LOU and the progress tracking form and the IDP work together. This video is really good for incoming students. So if you're at the beginning of your program and you're starting to set your goals to get to where you want to be towards the end of your program, I recommend watching the video. It's a lot easier to plan meaningfully if you've seen the video at the beginning versus if you've already kind of gone through stuff and then you have to go back to the beginning and try to set goals in reverse. So I recommend checking it out. It's not very long. Okay, the next follow-up to this is tracking progress. So this is also key, right? You want to set goals that you can achieve. And in terms of achieving goals, it's important to actually track your progress. This also can give you a sense of fulfillment, which can help with motivation, the feeling that you're actually making it through the different milestones that you have to do. If you're a PhD student, you will have progress tracking built in. So you're going to be required to attend annual progress tracking meetings through supervisory committee. Your role at these progress tracking meetings is to set objectives for the coming year. So that's what you do in year 1. And then in year 2, you set objectives for the coming year, and you also report on last year's progress. So it's good to set objectives in that first year that you think you will meaningfully achieve, because in the next year, you'll need to report on the progress that you've made towards those objectives. And then at the end of that, you receive a written evaluation on last year's progress from your supervisory committee, which can seem scary, but most supervisors are really trying to make sure that you're on track in terms of where you're going, to make sure that when you get to that annual progress meeting, they can write great things about you. Yes. So I will send you the links to the slides immediately at the end of the presentation. I actually have the file. So I will stop sharing my screen. I will pop the slides in here, and I believe Clay will also send them to you directly. I tried to get it to work so that I could post you the links in the chat, but I wasn't able to get it to work today, so my apologies. You will have access to these links. If you're not sure about annual progress tracking meetings, I'll also say that's really common. A lot of students that we talk to are really nervous about these meetings because it's an evaluation, which can seem scary. And so to help alleviate some of the anxieties, we interviewed current students about what they wish they knew before their progress tracking meeting, and they had mostly reassuring things to say. So a lot of them talked about how anxious they were when they first were going into the meeting and how it ended up not being as stressful as they thought it was going to be. So that's the gist of the video, but you can hear their actual strategies for prepping and what the meeting was like by watching this video. Yeah, I will send you the video of this meeting. We might. Chris, if you're still here, do we send them the video? I assume we do. I'm going to assume yes. Yes, we will post it online. So yes, you'll have a memory of everything we talked about, which is great. The other thing to note too, since we're talking about resources and videos, is I do a lot of supervision workshops throughout the term. And it's usually not just me, it's me, current students, and people at skill sets. So I'll show you where the link to that is as well. You can join us for some of the follow-up workshops, so you can actually chat with us some more, do different case studies, explore different issues related to supervision. So lots of opportunities to engage with us. Okay, this is my fourth strategy, and that's where to go for help. Okay, prepare yourselves because there's a lot of places to go for help, which is why I really point you to the graduate program director first. So if you're at all looking at this and going like, wow, too many people, there are too many offices at McGill to help, don't fret. Try the GPD first, your graduate program director. They will know where to direct you. The reason I like to point out all these different offices is that they each specialize in a different kind of help. And so if you know the kind of help you need, you can save a step by going directly to the office or to the person that you really think would benefit you instead of going to GPD first. I also bring this up because sometimes your supervisor is the GPD. And so I'm going to talk about what to do if your supervisor is the GPD, in which case you might want to go talk to somebody else about the issues that you're having with your supervisor. All right, so I have this broken down more or less into 3 buckets, depending on the kind of help you're looking for. So first bucket is advice and resources. So there are lots and lots of offices at McGill who are here to help you. These offices are all staffed by people like me and like Chris, who work with graduate students all the time and are really keen to make sure that you have what you need to have a great time here. The first place that many people go when they want to talk about supervision, whether there's something they just have a question about or something that's happening that they're not sure what to think about, a lot of people go to the ombudsperson. The ombudsperson can listen and can help you advocate for yourself. So they can't intercede on your behalf in most cases. They're really just there to help you understand where you stand in the policy landscape. So if anything happens that you're kind of unsure about, like, you want to talk to somebody, you're not feeling good about what's happening, most people stop at the GPD's office, first stop, or the ombudsperson. Next, similar is PGSS Committee for Member Support. They also can listen to you and help advise you. The great thing about the PGSS Committee for Member Support is they're fellow students, so they also understand what it's like to be a student in 2022. They understand the pressures and they can give you advice based on things that they've seen or experienced themselves. Next, Office of for Mediation and Reporting. This is a specialized office. So this office is really helpful if you've witnessed or experienced issues related to harassment, discrimination, or sexual violence. You can make an appointment to talk with them at any time. They're open to anyone in the McGill community. It can be a student, staff member, faculty member, and they can provide trauma-informed response to whatever you might be experiencing. So if you do need to talk to somebody about something that's really sensitive like this, go ahead and make an appointment to talk with the OMR specifically, or the GPD. And next, Dean of Students. Dean of Students is more general purpose. So Dean of Students is also really good. They can listen and direct you to resources. They have a really good sense of what resources are available on campus and who to talk to about things. So if you do have something to talk about, you can also turn to them for advice. Okay, so that's advice and resources outside of the department. I'm actually going to skip over to the bucket on the right, the mentorship bucket. So sometimes in supervision, it's not always possible to get everything you need from just one supervisor. Like in any relationship, we can't all be everything to everybody. So it's entirely possible that at some point you're going to want to talk to other people to receive mentorship or some kind of support that you're not receiving from your supervisor. If you're looking for that kind of thing, I'd recommend talking to your supervisory committee. There's a whole other video on the graduate supervision website about how to forge relationships with your committee. But most committee members, if you have them in place early, should be able to provide you with a little bit of mentorship, especially regarding how to navigate supervision. They won't necessarily like step in on your behalf, but they can at least help you kind of learn the unspoken rules of what to do and what not to do as people who are interested in your development. Next is the peer support center and the peer support programs. Sometimes the best mentorship comes from people who are like close to your situation, who understand it really well, but have been here slightly longer than you have. And that's where peer mentors can be absolutely helpful. So we have these 2 programs, but also you can seek mentorship from basically anyone in your department who's maybe been there a little bit longer than you. Most people who've been there a little bit longer than you will be more than happy to help someone who's new really learn the unspoken rules and the expectations. Okay, and then finally, my bucket in the middle to resolve a conflict. So if you do have a conflict with your supervisor, if there's something that isn't going well and you need to talk to somebody about it, usually the advice is to start inside your department because that's the likeliest path towards seeing change, right? So if you need something to change with your supervisor, usually you're going to have to start by talking to your supervisor about it in order to have them change. And the thing most people do in this situation is they talk to their supervisor directly, or if that doesn't feel appropriate, if they're kind of not sure what to say, they go to the graduate program director first. So the graduate program director can really provide a bit of mentorship and coaching in terms of how to resolve a conflict with your supervisor. If the mentorship and coaching doesn't work, usually they're also able to mediate between you and your supervisor to decide if that relationship is salvageable, if the conflict is resolvable, or if you need to change supervisors, which does happen occasionally. I'll say that if it doesn't get resolved to that level, so if the GPD isn't able to help, you next go to the chair. I'll also mention that if something happens in your supervisor relationship that is really distressing, I hope it doesn't happen, but if something happens and you're really like, I do not know what to do about this, I can't talk to my supervisor about this, go directly to the chair. The way that the department structure works, the GPD is usually your supervisor's colleague, so they're on the same level. The department chair is usually the supervisor of your supervisor. So if something very serious happens, you can always go directly to the chair instead of going to the GPD. And usually most issues get resolved at this level. If they don't, or if your supervisor is the GPD or if your supervisor is the chair, that's when you might want to start going outside of your faculty. And so the way the structure works, it goes from faculty associate deans. Your faculty will have an associate dean that's in charge of grad studies. From there, it goes to the GPS associate deans. There are 3 of them. You can see them in the 3 associate dean videos that are on the Graduate Supervision website. If you do have a general question, you can also actually submit a question through that website, and we can see if we can get it answered by an associate dean. They also have an email, the GPS Associate Deans. So if you do need to talk to somebody, you can always try reaching out to the GPS Associate Deans. They may end up referring it back to the GPD, but usually they don't mind at least referring you to the place they think they'll be the most helpful. And then finally at the top, there's the GPS Dean, but it's very rare for a case to not be resolved all the way up to that level. Most things get resolved internally, usually within the department. Okay. I'm just going to leave a little space for questions. Does anybody have any questions while I pause to take a drink of water? Oh no, someone has asked to join a Facebook group, but they haven't been accepted. Alas, it's possible that they have not noticed a notification yet. Interesting. Do you guys know which Facebook group this is? There's lots and lots of different Facebook groups. Is this a Clay Facebook group? Is it a departmental Facebook group? Can we help you? Someone is reassuring that it does take a while to get, oh, okay. It was us who could help you. That's great. All right. Interesting. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't actually have the access to the Facebook group. I would advise maybe trying to message them to see if there can be an update. I see. Okay, so people are gradually getting in. Hopefully everybody will get in good time. Thank you for your patience. Okay. We're going to move on to case study number 3. Okay, case study number 3. You are really looking forward to working with your supervisor, but after starting your coursework, you realize your research will take a different direction. Your new thesis topic appears to be outside of your supervisor's area of expertise, but your current supervisor insists that they will still be able to supervise you. They have tried to be helpful, sending relevant articles and redirecting you to research talks, but they're still unfamiliar with your research area. One of your course instructors specializes in your new area of interest, but it seems clear that your current supervisor wants to continue working with you on your new project. What are your options here? And who could you reach out to talk about your options? So like last time, I'm going to give us maybe a 30 seconds grace period here for people to think about this one and write out their answers. And then I'm going to call for suggestions on what to do in this case study. Okay, what are your options here? What are some ways that you could navigate this situation, and who could you reach out to talk to about these options? What do you guys think? I'll realize too that some of the answers could be different depending on what program you're in. I left it vague so we can discuss the various things that would happen depending on what program you're in. Okay, let's look at the chat. Yeah, so someone comments co-supervision is a good answer here. I agree. If you have two supervisors who are supporting you, that's a great situation to be in. You don't necessarily have to choose between one or the other. Co-supervision could be great. And yes, you could reach out to the supervisory committee or the GPD. You could reach out to the supervisor directly to kind of say, I'm considering a co-supervision. What do you think of that? In most cases, I would recommend contacting the supervisor first to discuss the co-supervision and see if they're like open to it. Then potentially talking to the course instructor. If you're not sure how this is going to go over, talk to the GPD first. The GPD can help you maybe kind of reach out and navigate that conversation in the best way possible. The great thing about GPDs is they're colleagues with these people, so they usually understand what approaches might be good to use with them or what's worked in the past. Yeah, so somebody else points out co-supervision. Yeah, with two supervisors implicated in the research. Yeah, so co-supervision I think is a great option. Yeah, going to the GPD. Yeah, and I'll say yes. So it's possible that you might want to change supervisors. So co-supervision is kind of like the nice approach, just having two supervisors. But if the supervisor is kind of like reluctant to engage in this, it is also possible to change supervisors. This is one of, I think, the main reasons people do change supervisors is because the research isn't a great fit, right? When you apply to work with a supervisor, you don't always necessarily know if the fit is going to be great. And so it's not uncommon to need to change because the fit is not exactly great. And so this is a common reason people do it. The one thing to keep in mind when you change supervisors is that it can impact your funding. So sometimes co-supervision is really helpful because you can kind of maintain the funding package that you agreed to with that original supervisor because that person's still supervising you, but you get the benefit of the other person's expertise, which is very helpful. Somebody asks, does everyone have course instructors? It depends on if you take courses, really. So I think in some programs, you really might not take that many courses. It depends. I've seen a variety across different programs. In most programs, you will spend your first year taking like one or two or more courses, in which case you're going to be meeting faculty members across the department. So you'll be starting to kind of mix with different people. If you don't take courses though, then no, you won't have course instructors. It won't be required. Okay, someone is asking about courses. So received an email regarding graduate supervision course you have to complete. Hey, it's me. You can contact me. So I will write down your name and I should be able to add you to that actually. So I'll have a look. Okay. Does changing a supervisor mean that a student has to go through the admission process again? No, usually not. The thing you have to work out is whether your supervisor is providing you funding or not. That's usually the part that's the stickiest. So in some units, you don't actually necessarily receive funding from your supervisor, in which case switching supervisors is a little more simple. But yeah, it's something to talk to with your GPD. So this would be a really good question to bring to your GPD to talk about, should I try co-supervision? Should I try switching supervisors? What is going to be in my best interest long-term? And your GPD should be able to help you game that out. Okay. All right, great. I will look into this regarding the graduate supervision course, you guys. It should show up on my courses for you relatively soon. It takes about 30 minutes to complete. It really just makes sure that you have the basics in place to make sure you can start your supervisory relationship with the best possible foot forward. So I will save the chat. So I will have your names. As long as your names that you've shared here are your full names that you use with McGill, I should be able to get to the bottom of this for you. Yeah, okay. It's possible that the actual people have not been invited to my courses. I'll look into this. But thank you guys. I'm glad we connected today. Okay. Okay, so to recap, we're nearing the end of the workshop. We're almost into the open Q&A portion. Our strategies have been, first, know your roles and responsibilities. 2, clarify and re-clarify expectations. 3, set goals and track progress. And 4, know where to go for help. So these are the 4 things I hope you can take away from this session today. They're all things that you will kind of need to keep doing. They're not one and done processes. They're processes that you'll be engaging in throughout your time here. And although it can seem kind of stressful to think about doing all these things together, by doing them proactively, you really can ensure that you get the most meaningful experience here as possible. And you can take advantage of all the resources that are available to help you succeed, not just academically, but also professionally and personally as well. The thing I like to emphasize at the end, which I think I said at the beginning too, is the skills that you develop here are part of the training. So learning to work with a supervisor, learning to clarify expectations and track progress and set deadlines and things like that. They're all skills that you probably already have, and skills that you'll continue developing as you go through your professional career. So they're part of what it means to be a graduate student, and they're part of the skills that you take with you when you leave. So getting a graduate degree often means that you're the kind of person who really can take on self-directed projects with minimal supervision towards the end. The resources, as I've been saying throughout, so I'm just going to recap them really quickly. You'll have the links here in the slides. So the GPS Supervision website, I really recommend you check it out. It's very, it's got lots of resources on things you might be interested in learning more about and videos. The GradHub website, you've probably received emails about already. The GradHub website provides a one-stop shop for any question you might have as a new student coming to McGill, especially a new graduate student. It's got resources on supervision. It's got resources on moving to Montreal. It's got a range of things. The McGill Student Handbook outlines all of the policies that you're bound by as a student. Definitely good to familiarize yourself with that early on. And then skill sets. So skill sets is a professional development workshop series. And you can join supervision workshops with me and my colleagues from Teaching and Learning Services there. We do one a month. So they're kind of like this one, but slightly more interactive, and there are more hosts, which is helpful, makes it much more conversational than this is. They're also Zoom webinars too, so you don't actually have to come downtown. You can join us from wherever you happen to be. Okay, so the last thing I'll share before turning over to questions is Graduate Supervision has tons of resources available online. You can follow us in a more kind of social way without joining our workshops by checking out any of our accounts. We have a YouTube channel if you're interested in our videos. We have an Instagram where we share the videos. We share about one a week. And we have a Facebook where we'll also be starting to share our videos. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the supervision workshop here, the supervision graduate supervision course. Let's see. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that the graduate supervision course that the person mentioned at the beginning is the required orientation course. So it is a course that happens on my progress. It's not a course in the sense that you have to show up every week. It's really just kind of an online training module. It takes about 30 minutes to complete. I help create the content for this module, but I have not been in the loop in terms of when the announcement actually goes out or how the sign up goes out. It sounds like it's been a little bit inconsistent right now. Like some people have received emails about it, some people have not, which to me suggests that it's in process. So they might be in the process of getting everybody uploaded, but they might not be fully done yet. So we're discovering this by having you all in the same room at the same time. But usually you would not necessarily notice this because you would all be receiving your emails and you're being added to the course at different times. So we apologize for that. But yeah, there will be communication about the course. I don't want to promise anything now because I'm not in the loop, but I will save the chat so that I have everybody's information so I can follow up and make sure that everybody is added that needs to be added. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the recording now, and then I'm going to go into questions that people have sent me. All right, so goodbye, everybody watching the recording. Thank you for joining us.